Hello everybody, welcome to SuperProfs. I'm Neha Kaushik and I'm a qualified company secretary and an MCom. I teach you ethics, governance and sustainability. Today we will be discussing about lesson number 2, that is ethical principles in business, what we have started in the last class. So let's have a quick recap of what we have done in the last class, in the previous class, and then I'll tell you what we are going to do in today's class. In the last class, we have discussed how organizational structure affects ethics, how ethics are implied, or how ethics flow in the organizational structure starting from the top till the bottom. And then we have discussed the role of board of directors. We have discussed how board of directors play a fiduciary role. They play a very important role with respect to the business. How board of directors are entrusted with the responsibility of managing the affairs of the company, managing the assets, managing all the assets what the company has, which basically belongs to the shareholders for the interest of the shareholders. How they act in the fiduciary position, how they act in the position of a trust from the point of view of the shareholders, and what all responsibilities they carry while they are working in the organization. Because no organization belongs to the directors, it belongs to the shareholders and the stakeholders at large. And we have also discussed how each and every decision of the board of directors affects the stakeholders at large, how the interests of the stakeholders get affected by each and every decision of the board of directors. Now in today's class, we'll be discussing very important mechanism of whistleblower and also how whistleblower has been recognized in different acts and different programs worldwide. Also, we'll be handling a case study. We'll be studying a case study about whistleblower mechanism, and how Indian laws have recognized this concept of whistleblowing and have incorporated this concept not only in the Companies Act and its effect in the various laws. So, let's start with our first basic meaning of whistleblower policy. And to start with, what was the basic idea, what was the basic concept, how whistleblower evaluated or evolved after a period of time. I mean, whistleblower, to start with the term whistleblower, it has the significance, or it has the practice. It originates from the time of the British policeman who raises or who blows whistle whenever they observe any wrongdoing in the community, or the commission of a crime was witnessed by the British policemen, then they were having a habit of blowing the whistles. So that was the place where the concept of whistleblowing started, and that's why this whole process, the vigil mechanisms, I would say, have been given the name of whistleblower policy, because it has its deep root into the time in the ancient time when the British policemen they observed any activity, or they observed the commissioning of any crime. At that time, what they were doing, they were having a habit of blowing their whistles. So that's why this concept of vigil mechanism, we can say, or this whole concept of taking into recognition or taking into consideration of the top level management about any wrongdoings in the organization, in the company, that whole concept is known as whistleblower policy. So the term whistleblower originates from the practice of British policemen who blew their whistles whenever they observed commissioning of a crime. Basically, what is whistleblowing? If I just talk about what is whistleblowing is, when we are working in an organization, we are not working as an individual, we are working as a team, and each and every effort, each and every action of ours has an impact on the overall working of the organization. At that time, it becomes very, very important, because every person who's working in the organization, he's not working for his own self, he's not working alone, he's not working only for his own good, but he's the primary objective of any employee. The primary objective of any employee is the organizational welfare. So it becomes a moral responsibility. It becomes a moral responsibility of any employee, of each and every employee, that whenever they see any wrongdoing in the organization, then that employee would get into the notice of the top level management that, look, something bad is happening in the organization, and being the person who formulates all the plans and policies, who formulates the ethics in the organization, who formulates or takes each and every step in the organization, you have the responsibility to stop this wrongdoing. So I, being an employee, I, being a responsible employee of this organization, I am taking this wrongdoing into your consideration, that takes certain steps against this wrongdoing. This whole process is known as whistleblowing. What the employee here is doing, when the employee is witnessing any wrong act in the organization, then he's bringing into the notice of the top level management, about what he's taking to notice, that is the wrongdoing in the organization. That, look, because whatever wrong is happening in the organization, there might be a possibility that the people, or even a syndicate of people, a group of people, they are trying to do the wrong only to serve personal benefits. Because whenever we are working in an organization, when the employee or when the individual starts thinking for his own personal good and neglecting the good of the organization, then that wrongdoing results in hampering or harming the organization. See, automatically the organization belongs to the shareholders. So the person or the employees who are working in the organization are expected to deliver and expected to create wealth creation for the shareholders. But in this situation, when the employer starts doing something wrong to the organization, in that case, what is happening? They are neglecting the good of the stakeholders or the shareholders at large, and they start gaining personal benefits, or they start making personal benefits of their own. At that time, it becomes very important that any person within the organization, because when something is happening, suppose some wrong is happening in the organization, a group of people are doing something wrong, or even one person even in the board of directors or even in the senior management is doing something wrong to gain personal benefits. In that type of situation, his actions or his all the activities would be governed basically by the people with whom that person is working. Suppose there's an organization X Limited, and there is Mr. A, who is at a senior level management. He is working as a senior level management. Now, Mr. A is doing certain things. Maybe he's doing insider trading, or he's leaking the information, confidential information of the company to the competitors. Any wrongdoing Mr. A is doing. Now, all these wrongdoings Mr. A is doing only to gain personal benefits. At this moment of time, what Mr. A is doing? He's doing all this to gain personal benefits. So, all the activities of Mr. A would be very well judged, or would be very well noticed by his colleagues or by his downlines. So, all the people who are not in syndicate with Mr. A, they would be working for the organization, and at that moment of time, they would be thinking that if this wrongdoing of Mr. A would continue, in the long run, the organization would get harmed. The image of the organization would get harmed, or the interest of the shareholders would get harmed. And when the organization or the interest of the shareholders or the interest of the organization is harmed at large, so the stakeholders are also affected, and employees are one of the stakeholders. At that moment of time, suppose there's a colleague of Mr. A, or the downline of Mr. A, that's Mr. B. So what does Mr. B does? He writes a letter to the board of directors of X Limited, telling them that Mr. A is doing certain bad things in the company that would be harming the organization in the coming future. By this, Mr. B is protecting the interests of the organization, as well as he is protecting his own interests. Because when the interest of the organization is protected or the interest of the shareholders is protected, then automatically the interest of the stakeholders is also protected. The interest of Mr. B is also protected as he is the employee of the organization. So let's suppose in the coming time the organization, because of the wrongdoings of Mr. A, if we just suppose for a moment that Mr. B didn't raise his voice against this wrongdoing of Mr. A, then what will happen in the coming future? What will happen? The organization would be facing serious financial or losses of financial problems in the coming future. At that moment of time, what will happen? Mr. A would be having personal benefits, personal gains. Then his interest would not be affected, but the interest of the organization and the interest of the stakeholders would be affected. And Mr. B, being the employee of the organization, he is one of the stakeholders of the organization. Then automatically the rights or the interest of Mr. B is also affected. So indirectly, if Mr. B is raising voice against the wrongdoings of Mr. A, then he is protecting his own interests as well. But the primary focus, primary objective of this raising of his voice or blowing the whistle at this time of Mr. B is protecting the interests of the organization at large. So whistleblower policy at large, what it is? Basically, in whistleblower, what the employee is trying to do, it is trying to keep into notice of the top level management or the senior level management of anything wrong that is happening in the organization. Now, this concept of whistleblower, if I just talk about, has its existence from the late Kautilya's in the ancient India. Kautilya dynasty, we all know that in that dynasty, whistleblower policy has its relevance. If I just say this concept of whistleblower is not very well known in the past. I mean, this concept has evolved only in the past 1 or 2 decades. By the inception of the frauds and the major scams, this policy of whistleblower has come into existence and gained momentum. It's gaining momentum day by day. But previously, like 1 or 2 decades before, whistleblower policy was not so very much in parlance, in business parlance. But if I just talk about its existence, it has its existence in the ancient of the Kautilya dynasty, when the king has proposed that if there would be any informant, then that informant has, if he has proved that whatever information that person has provided to the king or his courtmen, then if he succeeds in proving him right, then he will be awarded 1/6 of the money that is involved in the whole matter in question. Then he'll be awarded 1/6 of the total money in question. So what is it? This whole concept is nothing but whistleblower, the present whistleblower policy, what we are having right now. So whistleblower has its roots deep into the ancient Indian concept, Indian civilization, but it has lost its relevance over and after a period of time. And whenever something happens to the society, whenever there's an economical crisis, whenever there's something bad happens to the society, then then different concepts evolve, and whistleblower is such concept. It has its existence back in the society. It loses its relevance. But again, when there is a financial crisis, like the scam of Enron and so on, so this policy again gained its momentum, not only in India, but all across the world. Now, basically, it is just like whistleblower. It is just like the empire, like an empire or a referee. He draws public attention to a foul in a game by blowing the whistle. Whenever there's a game going on, and there is some foul that has happened. Now, while playing, the players, they might not be able, in a field of football, if I just take an example, if in a field of football, when the players are playing, when they are playing, they are there in the sportsman spirit, then at that moment of time, when they are playing, they will not be knowing that anything bad is happening or how the players are playing. They are just concentrated and they are just focused on how they are playing. At that moment of time, there is some third person, or there's some person who is analyzing the actions of each and every player. That person is analyzing the game of each and every player. So at that moment of time, if any foul or if any wrong has happened in the game while the players are playing, so it becomes the responsibility of the umpire or the referee to blow the whistle and make into knowledge of everybody, to the public at large, or even to the players who are playing the game, that now some fault has happened and whatever penalties would be there. So the role of the referee is that to bring that foul into the notice of the public and also to the players who are playing the game. This whole concept of whistleblower policy is the same. The whistleblower policy or the vigil mechanism, it basically focuses on raising any wrong act that is happening in the organization and making it available in the public domain, making it public, making it available, making it known in the public or in the management or in the company or even in public at large, and that something wrong is happening in the organization, and we, being the employee of the company, has a responsibility of stopping this wrong and to look after this wrong, that this wrong would not even happen in future. The policy of whistleblowing is not only confined to raising the voice at the time when the wrong is happening, but the basic idea is that whatever wrong is happening today would not be happening in the coming future as well. That is basically the whole idea behind whistleblowing. So now we will be discussing what are the types of whistleblowers. First type of whistleblower is the internal whistleblower. Now in the internal whistleblower, what happens? Someone from within the organization raises his voice and keeps to the notice of the top level management about the wrongdoings of one person in that organization. I mean, as we all are working in the organization, suppose the previous example, what I have given you guys, I have explained that Mr. A was doing something wrong and Mr. B, being his colleague, became aware of the wrongdoings of Mr. A. So what Mr. B does, he raised his voice or he escalated the issue to the top level management of X Limited and make them aware that Mr. A is doing something bad. So in this kind of situation, in this kind of whistleblower, what is happening? The internal person from the organization is raising his voice against the wrongdoing of a person from the organization. So this type of whistleblower policy is known as an internal whistleblower. Now the second one is external. External whistleblower is that when someone from the outside the organization, when someone from outside the organization becomes aware of the wrongdoing of the act of within the organization and he keeps into the notice of that wrong to the public domain. Like, for example, we can take the example what happened with Cadbury when worms were detected in the package of Cadbury. What happened at that time? People who found that the worms were there, or the mosquitoes, or whatever worms were there in the chocolate, on the packaged chocolate. What happened? Then the people who were outside the organization raised this thing and made this thing into the public domain, that the Cadbury, being into the FMCG industry, is not following particular standards and wrong is happening in the organization. So that was basically can be an example of external whistleblowing policy. Now, alumni. What do we refer to as an alumni? Alumni is like a former employee of the organization, employee who has left the organization but has known that something bad is happening to the organization. Now at that moment of time, the person is not into the employment of the organization. He has already left the organization, but being a responsible formal employee, what he does, he brings into the notice of the management of the company that, look, this thing bad is happening in the organization. Now, open whistleblower. When an open whistleblower, what happens? When the name of the whistleblower becomes open in the public domain. For example, if an employee, Mr. X sends a notice to the top level management about the wrongdoing of a manager or senior level management or any person belonging to a certain different group, then he raises his concern and he sends a letter to the top level management or makes it to the top level management, and after due investigation, or it is known to everybody that Mr. X was the person who has escalated this issue, and it's open. When the name of the Mr. X become open in the public domain, that this was the person who was the whistleblower, then that refers to open whistleblower. Now, personal. Sometimes it happens in the organization that even in the board of directors, there are different groups. some board of directors are having certain ideology, and some board of directors would not be having the same ideology, or they might differ from the ideology of a particular director. For example, there is a board comprising of Mr. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. These are the board of directors of XYZ Limited. So what's happening in this case? There is Mr. C, who is targeting Mr. F. Now what Mr. C is doing, he is targeting only a single person, and he is doing something, or he is doing something wrong that would affect only the interest of Mr. F. In this type of wrongdoing, the main target of the wrongdoer is not the organization but a particular person. It is personal. It is person specific. Then this type of whistleblower is known as personal whistleblowing. When a particular person or the wrongdoing of the wrongdoer is aimed at a particular person, at that type of whistleblowing is known as a personal whistleblower. Moving on. Now it comes the impersonal whistleblower. Now, impersonal whistleblower. When the act of the wrongdoing or the wrongdoing of the wrongdoer is aimed at harming others but not to gain personal benefit, when the wrongdoing act or wrong acts of a wrongdoer are aimed at harming other people, the aim of doing the wrong of the wrongdoer is not to gain personal benefits but to harm other people. In that type of whistleblower is known as the impersonal whistleblower. Now, government. Whenever we know that we are living in a country called India, where the bureaucratic government organizations and all the people associated with the government departments are very corrupt, I would just say. These, in general, I'm not generalizing the entire government departments, but majority of people faces this kind of problems nowadays. So whenever there is some corrupt practices by the government, and someone has been seriously affected by the wrongdoings of the government department, then and particularly a government official is doing something wrong, being a public, it becomes a responsibility, because the government, basically, what is the government? The government is chosen by the people only. So, and it's the moral responsibility of the government that whatever they do for the benefit of the people. And if any government employee is not fulfilling his duty properly, and anyone from the public gets to know about it, and he is raising his voice against the wrongdoings of the government, then that is known as government whistleblower. We can just take an example from the Anshan, what Mr. Anna Hazare has done previously 5-6 years back. So at that moment of time, this whole agenda of that Anshan was based against the wrongdoings of what the government department was doing. So this type of whistleblowing, when the wrongdoing of the government officials are taken into the consideration and the voice is raised, and to put the wrongdoing act to be in the public, that is government whistleblowing. Now, another example would be the coal scam. What happened while the allocation of the coal mines? So what happened after all the scam happened? That information about the wrongdoing has been put into the public domain, and that type of whistleblowing was government whistleblowing. Now, corporates. Any wrongdoings that a particular corporate house is doing, and that is affecting the entire society, that wrongdoing is happening in the organization at large, now that type of whistleblowing is known as the corporate whistleblowing. So what different types of whistleblowing we have done? We have done internal whistleblowing, we have done external whistleblowing, where when the whistleblowing is within the organization, that is internal whistleblowing. When the whistleblowing is from someone who's outside the organization, that is external whistleblowing. Then when the whistleblowing policy has been followed by a former employee or by an ex-employee, then becomes an alumni whistleblowing. When the name of the whistleblower is known in the public domain, that is open whistleblowing. Then personal whistleblowing, when the harm is aimed to a specific person, that is personal whistleblowing. Impersonal whistleblowing, when the wrongdoer, the main aim of the wrongdoer is to harm a specific group of people at large, then it is called impersonal whistleblowing. And government whistleblowing, when there is any wrong act or wrongdoing on the part of the government official, that is government whistleblowing. Corporate whistleblowing, when there is any wrong act that is happening in the corporates or any particular company, that is corporate whistleblowing. Now moving ahead. Now we'll be discussing certain legal provisions which has identified whistleblowing policy in the acts, and how and what are the implications that whistleblowing policy and protection of whistleblower basically has been provided in a different act, and what are the implications of whistleblowing policy under these acts. We'll be discussing that. First is the Sarbanes-Oxley Act 2002. This act was passed by the US Congress in the year 2002 by a very big and famous scam of that time, that was Enron scam, which took place in the year. Enron scam, which took place in the year 2001. Now, we'll be even discussing this case study in the coming slides to come. Now, what happened at that moment of time, by this, it was a very big scam, and the scam on a very large scale. At that moment of time, what happened? The government thought that there lacks a mechanism, and that mechanism was whistleblower, because Enron organization was old organization. I mean, it was a very old organization, and it evolved over a period of time. Starting from a very small organization, it grows huge into size, and it was known worldwide. At that moment of time, if something was happening wrong, I have also discussed in previous classes that whenever something wrong happens in any company, that is wrong is not happening only on a particular day, or it has not happened only in a particular event. Like if the scam has broke in the years, let's say today is 2017. So if the scam has broke in 2017, that doesn't mean that the scam has taken place only in 2017. Maybe the scam was evolving over a period of time, and maybe the syndicate of people who were involved in this scam were planning the scam, or maybe they were frauding everybody in the organization and the people and the society. Maybe they were doing decades ago. So at that moment of time, when something bad is happening in this organization on a very continuous basis, so the people working in the organization, they are observing each and everything. And those people are in the best position to judge, or to see, or to make, or to raise a voice, or to blow their whistles at that time about the wrongdoings of the senior management. So that was the concept, but that was recognized in this Sarbanes-Oxley Act, that whatever wrong was happening at that time, there was need of the serious whistleblower policy who can just safeguard the interests of not only the shareholders but the stakeholders, because bigger the organization, bigger stakes are involved. There is a very simple concept even in the Companies Act. More and more of the sections of the Companies Act are applicable only on the public company, not on the private company. Private companies are given a lot of exemptions, and public companies, they are being more regulated. The simple concept between this application of law is that in a private company, less stakes are involved. And in a public company, when more and more money of the people is involved, when the stake of the people associated with the company involved is higher, or the people or the stakeholder, number of stakeholders is basically higher in a public company. That's why a public company is regulated more. So that is why it is observed, when that bigger the organization, bigger the stakes are involved, and bigger the stakes get affected. So in the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, the need for the whistleblowing policy was recognized, and the section 301 of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act recognizes that that provide following provisions of the whistleblower. First one is, make it illegal to discharge, demote, suspend, threaten, harass in any manner, discriminate against whistleblower. Now, what the act is doing? I have discussed this in previous classes also, that introducing whistleblower policy in the organization is one thing. But when you are not providing effective protection to the whistleblower, then you are basically not having a whistleblower policy. You are discouraging whistleblowers to not to raise their voice, because at that point of time, when whistleblower is not rewarded instead, that whistleblower is punished. Maybe he's punished, he's demoted, maybe he's discharged from his duty, he's threatened, threatened not to say anything against the wrongdoers, or he's harassed at the workplace, he's suspended from his services, or any act whatsoever manner there could be. If there is no effective protection to the whistleblower, then the whole concept of whistleblowing is defeated. Whistleblowing policy is a very welcoming policy, like you are introducing, or you are giving a say to the people of the organization, that whenever you see any wrong happening in the organization, then you are given a right to put forward whatever wrong you have observed in the organization. But at that time, if you are not giving effective protection to the person involved in this whistleblower activity, then you are basically not having an adequate whistleblower policy, but you are discouraging the whistleblower to raise his voice, because he knows that if he'll be raising his voice, then he'll get punishment for that and not rewards. So in this act, first and foremost, what they have safeguarded is the interest of the whistleblower, that he will not be demoted, he will not be discharged, he will not be suspended, he would not be threatened, he would not be harassed, or any manner, any discrimination would not happen in the case of the part of the whistleblower. Second one is that they have established criminal penalties. Now, it is a very serious kind of penalty in the year 2002, that whenever you are criminal penalties up to 10 years for executive who retaliate against whistleblowing. Now, you are not raising your voice, also you are retaliating against whistleblowing, then also you are doing something wrong for the organization, because indirectly, if you are retaliating, what you are trying to project at that moment of time, you are trying to project that a policy that is helpful for the organization, that policy that is helpful for the stakeholders at large, I am not in favor of that policy. And if I'll be watching anything wrong happening in the organization, then I'll not be the one who will be raising his voice. So in that case of time, in that situation, Sarbanes-Oxley Act has specifically provided criminal penalties up to 10 years for executives who retaliates against whistleblowing. Again, it requires board audit committee to establish procedure for hearing whistleblower complaints. Now, the audit committee, we all know, audit committee is basically responsible for all the financials, looking after all the financials, how the financials are being carried out, how the money of the company is being allocated to different sectors, how the money is being managed, how effectively the money is being managed. Basically, that is the role of the audit committee, and they look after the financial affairs of the company. So, though it requires an audit committee. Now, the audit committee is a very powerful committee in any company. So, this act is empowering the audit committee for hearing the whistleblowers' complaints, because automatically in business, if something wrong is happening, then it is going to affect the financials of that company in the coming future. So, it became the responsibility of the audit committee to take charge of such situations, and the audit committee in this case is being empowered or is being directed to listen to the whistleblower's complaint. Then last but not least, gives a whistleblower the right to jury trial. Now, my friends, jury trial, bypassing months and years of administrative hearings. Now, what happens? Whenever there is a case pending in the judicial system, what happens? There is a lot of administrative proceedings which take place months. So the whistleblower, if there is any kind of activity that is involved whistleblowing, then in that case, that person who has raised his voice in the whistleblower is entitled to a jury trial. I mean, all the time that is required, or the months or the years of administrative hearings that is required, then that time it can be surpassed with. That time can be surpassed with, and he can be given immediate jury trial in case of whistleblowing. Now that was Sarbanes-Oxley Act 2002. Coming down to Indian framework regarding whistleblowing. Now this is whistleblowing mechanism suggested by the Corporate Governance Voluntary Guidelines 2007. These guidelines are voluntary guidelines. I mean, these guidelines are not binding on the organization. They are just like suggestions. They are suggestions. They are not binding on the organization, but it acts as a path for the organizations to follow in corporate governance. Now, what these guidelines say about whistleblowing? The company should ensure the institution of a mechanism for employees to report unethical behavior, actual or suspected frauds, or violation of the company's code of conduct or ethical policies. Now, what this Corporate Governance Voluntary Guidelines 2009 saying here? It's saying that whenever there is the thing which is required to be noted in this point is actual or suspected frauds. If some fraud has happened in actual, that means that the fraud has happened. But suspected fraud is nothing has happened, but you are suspecting that if these wrong activities would carry on, then a big fraud is suspected to happen. So you can just see the scope of applicability is so wide that the actual fraud has happened, then it is already in the domain of the people working in the organization. There's something bad is happening in the organization, but when an employee is suspecting something bad to happen, then also he can raise his voice, and such companies should ensure a mechanism by setting up a committee for ethical code of conduct, or by setting up a committee which specifically has whistleblowing mechanism in question. If something has happened, just like an actual fraud, suspected fraud, or violation of company's code of conduct or the ethical policy, then the company should ensure an institution that may be in the form of committee or a group of directors who would be looking after it, or a specific department, whatever the case may be. But the company should ensure that there is a specific institution or a mechanism that would be looking after the employees who raise their voice against any wrongdoing in the organization. Now, second one is the company should also provide for adequate safeguards against victimization of employees who avail the mechanism, and also allow direct access to the chairperson of the audit committee in exceptional cases. Now, here, the chairman of the audit committee audit committee is a very, very powerful committee in any organization, and the chairman of that committee is basically very powerful person in the organization also. If you just see by the composition of an audit committee as per the SEBI LODR regulations or SEBI listing agreement, you can just see that these are independent directors who have the knowledge of finance and all. At least 3 directors should be there. 2/3 of the directors should be independent directors. So you can just see that what kind of directors who are involved. Independent director, basically they have huge expertise and knowledge about finances, and they are totally working in their independent capacity and putting their intellect into the company, so that they are in a better position to govern the company well in a corporately governed way. So that person who is observing something very wrong is happening, it's like the wrong that is happening has taken a new edge in the company, and that person is there's a exceptional need, there is a very urgent need for that person to contact urgent need for the person to bring it to the notice of the top level management about the wrongdoing, and in that case the person can even gain direct access to the chairman of the audit committee of any wrong things happening in the organization. So that was whistleblowing mechanisms suggested as per Corporate Governance Voluntary Guidelines 2009. That is, the company should ensure an institution or mechanism for employees who will be facing unethical behavior, suspected actual frauds and violation of company's code of conduct or ethical policy. Second one is that they will be providing adequate safeguards or against the victimization of the employees who avail the mechanism whistleblowing policy, and the employees who are availing the policy of the whistleblower, they can have the direct access to the chairman of the audit committee at that time. So these were the suggestions by the Corporate Governance Voluntary Guidelines 2009. Now moving ahead. Now we can also see there's Vigil Mechanism. Now we will be moving ahead. Vigil Mechanism under Companies Act 2013, which is a very important law and we should be all aware of it. We all know that Section 177 of the Act, read with Rule number 9 of Companies Meeting of the Board of Directors Rules 2014. It's specifically what it says. Is that every listed company, first of all, this section is applicable only to listed companies, and the companies belonging to such class as may be specified below. What are the classes of companies? Companies accepted deposits from the public, the companies who have accepted deposits from the public, and the companies who have borrowed monies from banks and public financial institutions. Now, the company who have borrowed money from the banks and public financial institutions exceeding 50 crore rupees. Now, three types of companies are covered in this case. First is the listed companies. Second one, the companies who have accepted deposits irrespective of the amount of deposit. Third one, the companies who have borrowed money from banks and public financial institutions, that is excess of 50 crore rupees or more. Then those companies are shall. There is shall, not can, or this is a mandatory requirement. Establish a vigil mechanism for their board of directors and employees to report the genuine concern of the employees followed the phase of the workplace to give its grievances. Now, what this provision is in the Companies Act is providing safeguarding the interests of the stakeholders. It is providing to safeguard the interests of the stakeholders that are associated with the company. That if anything bad is happening in a listed entity, then listed entity or the companies who accept deposits and the companies who borrowed money or the money from banks or public financial institutions, they are in excess of 50 crore rupees. These three types of companies are required to establish a vigil mechanism or a vigil mechanism for the directors and the employees of such company. So it is mentioned in the section 177 subsection 9 of the Companies Act, read with rule number 7 subrule 2. So this several subrule 1, 2 and so on. So the rule number 7, that is basically based on of Companies Meeting of Board of Directors Rules 2014. It basically talks about vigil mechanism which is to be followed by such classes of companies. Now, vigil mechanism is under SEBI LODR regulations. Now, SEBI LODR regulations, SEBI Listing and Disclosure Requirement Regulation 2015 also talks about vigil mechanism to be followed. First, the listed company entity should formulate vigil mechanism for the directors or employees to report genuine concerns. Second, vigil mechanism shall provide for adequate safeguard against victimization of directors and employees or other person who avails the mechanism. Third, the listed entity shall disseminate the details of establishment of this vigil mechanism or whistleblower policy. The disclosure regarding the details of establishment shall be affirmative, shall be made in the section of the corporate governance of the annual report. Now, one by one we'll discuss. First one is that the listed company should formulate a vigil mechanism for its directors and employees. Second one is the company shall provide safeguard against the victimization. Same as that we have read in the Sarbanes-Oxley Act 2002. That was the same point which provides against the victimization of the whistleblower, because if adequate protection is not provided to the whistleblower, then the entire motive or the motive behind whistleblower policy is defeated. Third one is the listed entity should disseminate about establishing the whistleblower mechanism. Look, if the people in the organization are not well aware of the of the process that a company follows, the process of whistleblowing, then that employee would not be in a position, like he would not be having any idea that the company is following certain approach towards whistleblowing or not. So the third one is that the company voluntary on its own part should disseminate the information to the employees of the company that the company has established a vigil mechanism in the company. And fourth one is that the vigil mechanism, or the people who had reported their grievances, there should be a separate column in the corporate governance column for corporate governance in the annual report of the company that would state about the whistleblower policy that the company is following. That was the SEBI LODR regulations on vigil mechanism. Now, there's a case study for whistleblowing policy and vigil mechanism. The case study is for Enron scam, a very famous scam that took place in the year 2001 and in the US, and this scam brought into existence Sarbanes-Oxley Act. What happened in that case? This company, Nebraska and Texas, these two companies get merged in the year 2000 in the year 1985. And that moment of time, they gave birth to Enron. The merged entity was Enron. Now, Enron was a very small organization, so very small corporation at the beginning, but it evolved over a period of time. And Mr. Lay was the chairperson. Mr. Lay was the chairperson of Enron for nearly 16 years. He served as a chairperson of Enron for 16 years. At that time, Mr. Lay making Enron from a very small organization to a very big corporate, and by the passage of his time in his tenure, Enron became the household name across the world. From a very small organization to becoming an organization that was very famous and became the household name not only to the country but to the entire world. What happened? Then in February 2000, the net worth, the value of the company was somewhere around USD 4.6 billion. And as for the Fortune 500 companies, Enron was ranked the 7th company in the list. But on 2nd of December 2001, Enron, one of the 10th largest US company of US, they filed for bankruptcy. Now you can just understand a small organization or a small corporation becoming to the world's 7th largest organization in the world as per Fortune 500 companies. They filed for a bankruptcy suit. In the same year, they were declared the 7th largest company in the world by Fortune 500 companies. Now, at that moment of time, even after Mr. Lay resigned from the organization, then Mr. Sterling, he assumed the office of the CEO. He assumed the office of the CEO, but after facing financial issues with the company, the new CEO left, and Mr. Lay assumes back as the CEO of Enron. At that moment of time that the company filed his bankruptcy suit, then finally one employee was there, that was Sharon Watkins. She was the Vice President of Corporate Development, and she finally became successful in alerting the board of directors of Enron about the wrongdoings of Mr. Lay over a period of time, how his unethical practices and how his wrongdoings has made a company that is no doubt the company rose up to a very, very high level, but it also faced a very bad downfall at that moment of time, and that was only because of the wrongdoings of Mr. Lay over a period of time. And he was the CEO for a continuous period of 16 years. No one questioned what he was doing, and Mr. Lay was not doing all this on his own. I have raised this question again and again, that whenever something wrong is happening in the organization, it is not only one person, it is a syndicate of person who is helping that wrong person for their own personal benefits. So Mr. Lay was also accompanied by some people in the organization like him who were doing wrong on a continuous basis. So you can just say, you can just think, Enron, such a big organization, when something bad happens to an organization, it doesn't only affect the shareholders of that company, it doesn't only affect the directors of the company, it affects the society as a whole, it affects the employees of the company, it affects the creators of the company, it affects the debtors of the company, it affects the government of the company, it even government of the country, but even even the image of the country is affected. And after the scam happened, in the year 2002, Sarbanes-Oxley Act, that was enforced, that was made. Now, I have a very interesting fact to share with you guys, which is which has a question in my mind, as also it has a very deep impact on the entire thinking of mine towards whistleblowing. I was just checking a list of the most ethically governed companies by Forbes magazine for the year 2016. And you would be shocked to believe that 80% of the list was constituted of the companies of USA. From India, only Tata Corporation was representing, two Tata Group companies were representing India, and one from the Bank of Australia was topping the charts. In that entire list, 80% of the list was constituted by the companies that were from the US. Now, the question here again comes that a very strict and stringent act which has very severe consequences, criminal consequences on the people who do the wrong. Only after the establishment of such acts, companies are bound to be ethical. So what is it? It is being regulated only by the acts of the legal framework of the country that is governing the ethics of a company. That is the question that is in mind. That is the question that is in my mind, that people are not willing to be ethical. They are being ethical only if there is someone or some regulation or some stringent provision or strict act behind them, that if they will be doing something wrong, then that act is there to give them punishment. So the intellect or the moral consciousness, what we have studied in earlier classes, it is not there in the heart of people. It is just like very few people. I am not generalizing all the people, but very few people are following that ethical intellect or ethical and moral consciousness among them, and they are following that in true letter and spirit. But most or the majority of the people are just falling in that 80%, 10, 18 in theory, 80% opportunity. Most of the people are falling only in the 80%. Only very negligible percentage from the population is following true spirit of whistleblowing or true spirit of being ethical in business. Everyone is just focused on the profits or on the quick gains. So a country which has enabled Sarbanes-Oxley Act, and it has strictly followed that act, and it is an act with very stringent provisions. Only after we'll also be having this such act in our country, then maybe that list would also include India's corporation's name as well, because people in business world are not willing to be ethical. They are just willing to be earning profits. And if they are having acts and stringent provisions and stringent acts, then those acts are compelling those people to be ethical. That is the problem. That's why this paper has been introduced as a 100-mark paper into CS professional program, because after you become a professional, it is a very big responsibility on you guys, because you will be the person who will be handling the legal affairs of the company. You will be the person who will be telling the company about the laws and regulations that rules and regulations that the company is bound to abide. So as a professional, it is not only the responsibility of as a professional, but also as a responsibility to make the corporates or the board of directors whom we give advice to give them a sense of being ethical in the business, because they are the people who are handling their businesses. They are the people who are providing to the society. They are the people who are giving something to the society. At that moment of time, it becomes a moral responsibility of being a professional also, that we guide the business houses, or we guide the board of directors to be ethical at that time. So that was all for today's class, in which we have discussed whistleblowing in very much detail. We have discussed what is the meaning of whistleblowing. We have discussed what are the types of whistleblowers. We have discussed the implication of the insertion of whistleblowing policy under different acts, ranging from Sarbanes-Oxley Act to the Companies Act to the suggestions in the corporate governance mechanism to regulations that is in 2009. And then we have also done the case study of Enron, Enron Corporation. And that's all for today's class. Thank you very much.